We'll talk about all the big stories today with Mark Francois, MP. He's the Shadow Defence Minister for the Conservatives. Mark, we'll talk about the Middle East in a second, but this row with the BBC, this drill rapper who has been played, this convicted murderer whose music has been played out in the BBC, what on earth are they playing at, Mark?
Well, you'd have to ask them, and by the sound of it, you already have. I just sometimes think the BBC should remember they are funded by what is in effect a national poll tax. People have to pay the licence fee, even if they watch very little or nothing of the BBC, and that gives the BBC a particular responsibility. And as someone who had, many rows with BBC interviewers over Brexit, I just would like to think that the BBC would be mindful of their duty of impartiality to the licence fee payer, because I'm not sure they always abide by that.
Yeah, and I think that's a very, very fair point from Mark Francois. Thank you. On the points that we've asked you actually specifically to come on and talk about, Yvette Cooper, do you see this as a U-turn on the inquiries? Do you think these inquiries are actually going to get to the bottom of what happens? I mean, if they've got £1 million for an inquiry, is not an awful lot.
Yes, Peter. I'm sorry. I thought you wanted me to come on and talk about Ukraine.
We can talk about Ukraine. Just give us your quick thoughts on the inquiries, and then we'll go straight to Ukraine and the Middle East.
Well, I think Labour have got themselves in a terrible, terrible internal mess over all of this, and I think what the Home Secretary was doing today was trying to row back from their previous position. I don't think they've maintained the confidence of the public on this, and I think that was apparent today.
OK, let's talk about Ukraine and the Middle East, and obviously both in your brief as a Shadow Defence Minister, Mark.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister has been there in Ukraine today, says we're standing shoulder to shoulder and will continue to. Obviously, things may change dramatically in 4 days when there is a new President of the United States. How do you see give us your evaluation of what Keir Starmer has done today versus what you think will happen in the next few days and perhaps weeks and months to come? We've had President Trump, soon to be president again, saying that he can solve Ukraine in 24 hours. He's changed that to say a few months. Clearly, this will be a major, major focus both of his administration and here in the UK as well in terms of getting it sorted out, getting some sort of deal done.
Yeah, I mean, it's good that the Prime Minister's been to Ukraine. I mean, I went about a year ago. I went to Odessa with the Defence Committee, which I served on at that time. It's good that Sir Keir Starmer is there. We have to support the Ukrainians. And by the way, I've been wearing this badge for 2 years. I didn't put it on tonight because I was coming on to do your show. They are fighting for us. They are fighting against Russian aggression. They are fighting for the right of independence and sovereignty. And if we don't stop Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, or don't help the Ukrainians stop them, we'll have to stop him in the Baltic states. And if we don't stop him there, we'll have to stop him in Poland. And by then you're into something which begins to look like World War III. So it's absolutely right that there's bipartisan support in the House of Commons between us and the Labour Party for Ukraine. If it's Chagos, we part company immediately. But on something like Ukraine, both we and the government do agree that Zelensky and the Ukrainians must be robustly supported. And it's not all going Putin's way. The Russians have had about 500,000 casualties so far, killed and wounded. It's slowly bankrupting the Russian economy. They've lost a lot of their oil and gas sales to the West because of sanctions. Their interest rates are at above 20%. And since then, countries like Finland and Sweden have joined NATO, having seen the threat. So, as Ben Wallace once said, Putin will end up with more NATO rather than less NATO.
And actually, on that note, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has said that the UK could be part of some sort of peacekeeping force in Ukraine or in a demilitarized zone or something like that. I'm just paraphrasing, but he said the UK could be part of a peacekeeping force. Is that a good use of resources? Is that a good use of British soldiers, especially when so many senior military officers, past and present, say that our military is actually very stretched?
Well, it would depend, Peter. I mean, I know you understand these things, but it would depend on exactly what the mission is. and exactly what the task is, and I can give you a better answer to that question when we know precisely what it is that's proposed. I think the risk in this situation is that if we were just to freeze the conflict where it were along the current front line, Putin would say something like, I've got the Crimea, I've kept most of the Donbass and the industrial resources there, and I've stopped Ukraine joining NATO, I've won. We cannot allow Putin a victory, because he'd wait a few years and then have a crack at someone else. So whatever comes out of these negotiations, it cannot be anything that allows Putin to cry victory. Because
how rapidly do you think Donald Trump will get into this? I mean, he previously said 24 hours. He's now said a few weeks or months or whatever. I mean, do you see in a short space of time there being some sort of deal done in regard to Ukraine, especially when you have the might and power of the office of the President of the United States behind it?
Even with Trump, I'd be surprised if it was sorted in 24 hours, Peter.
Yeah,
but I mean, there's certainly a determination among Trump and his. Sorry, we've got bells ringing.
Have you got to go and vote, Mark? Or
No,
can I ask you about the Middle East?
No, we're through that.
Okay.
So, but I think he will want to bring this to an early conclusion if he can, and he's a robust negotiator.
Yeah.
And if he puts pressure on Putin, that is probably a good thing. But you've got to remember, Putin is a man who said some years ago that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. He's trying, in effect, to rebuild a Russian empire by other means. You have to understand what this man wants. So I'm sure Trump will be robust, but we can't do anything that looks like a Russian victory.
What is your view on certainly various good reports coming out of the Middle East, coming out of Washington, London, elsewhere, about a ceasefire, hopefully being ratified, hopefully happening on Sunday, although Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, worried that Hamas are in effect blackmailing him. Those are his words. I just wonder whether you think a peace will happen, and will peace hold?
I very much hope so. I was in the House of Commons earlier today for the Foreign Secretary's statement, when he outlined the essence of the plan, which is a gradual release of hostages in over three phases. And the ceasefire would come into effect on Sunday if the Israeli cabinet ratify it tomorrow. But as you intimated, there seem to be suggestions that Hamas, having agreed the deal, are now trying to push at the last moment for the release of some additional Hamas prisoners. Now, after what happened with the attack, the appalling attack the previous October, there is no love lost between Israel and Hamas. So you can imagine the Israeli reaction if, having come to an agreement, Hamas try and change it. But let's hope they can get through this. Let's hope the ceasefire is ratified by both sides, as it were. It comes into effect on Sunday, and then we can begin to move on from there.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. That's Mark Francois there, MP for the Conservatives and Shadow Defence Minister.